Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. We may have some more people joining us as we get into our presentation, but we want to be respectful of your time. So thank you for joining us for this AdoptUSKids webinar called Using Family Finding Models to Achieve Permanency, Key Concepts and Strategies. This is the second in our AdoptUSKids two-part series of webinars on family finding and engagement. So we're really glad that you've joined us today. Many of you may have joined us for our first webinar, and if not, we'll give you some tips for how to access that recording later in this session, so you can get that information if you weren't able to join us before. So as we get started, I want to go over a few little housekeeping items here. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, so we will have it available on our website in the coming weeks, and we'll have that available along with the PowerPoint presentation, so you can have the information on the slides as well as be able to access the recording and share it with your colleagues. We do want you to engage with us during this webinar, so we hope you'll submit chat questions or comments using that chat, and please do be sure to send your comments or your questions to everyone so that your peers on the webinar can see what you're saying if you're okay with that. Otherwise, they may just default to coming to us as hosts and panelists. But if you're sharing great information and putting out suggested resources and all of that, it's always great for your peers around the country to get to see those as well. And then, as always, we do evaluate our webinars here at AdoptUSKids. We really value your input and feedback so we can keep doing what's helpful for you and strengthening in areas where we can do better so that we can really keep meeting your needs. So you will receive an email with a link to an evaluation survey shortly after the webinar ends. And we ask that you just take a few minutes and fill out that brief survey so that we can get your feedback and hear how we can meet your needs better as we go forward and what we should keep doing to support your important work in the field. Let's move on to the next slide. So now that you've been hearing me talk for a few minutes, I'll introduce myself. I am Alicia Groh. I'm a consultant with AdoptUSKids. I'm really proud to be part of this great project. And I also want to introduce Bob Hearn, our National Project Director at AdoptUSKids. You'll hear from him in just a moment. We also have really our featured guest speakers representing 3 family finding and engagement program models, who I know that's probably who you're most excited to hear from today. We'll introduce them in just a moment as we get ready to head into their presentations. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Bob Hearn, and let you get us started.
Thanks, Alicia. And so just before we start the actual presentation, a little bit about AdoptUSKids. AdoptUSKids is a collaborative that works under a cooperative agreement with the U.S. Children's Bureau to assist in meeting the mandates of the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. Our dual mission is to raise public awareness about the need for foster and adoptive families and to assist our states, territories, and tribes in the recruitment, engagement, development, and support of both foster and adoptive families. Next slide, please. So a bit about this family finding initiative is back in February 2020, AdoptUSKids was granted supplemental funds to conduct replication activities of 4 models of family finding that had shown promise. For the purpose of this funding, family finding was broadly defined in both traditional family finding and engagement models, as well as youth-specific recruitment models that assisted in achieving timely permanency. This allowed the funds to host a continuum of family finding and recruitment models that range from a macro systems change approach to a family finding engagement model, as well as 2 youth recruitment models that utilize videos as their main approach. Next slide, please. Here are the 4 models on the slide here. And the first 3 models were specifically created for youth who are involved in the foster care system and when formal reunification efforts had not been successful. So our first model, Extreme Family Finding by Foster Adopt Connect, is based on a traditional family finding and engagement model with the addition of a private investigator. The next model, Indepth Profiles by Northwest Resource Associates, is a video profile model that gives youth the lead voice in developing and sharing their profile. The I Belong project by America Kids Belong is also a video profile model that provides both a face and voice for children and youth waiting for permanency. And finally, the family engagement approach to permanency by the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness is a systems change model that prepares child welfare programs to engage in family finding and engagement work in order to build success. Next slide, please. So the component of the grant was really to have the replications done across the country. In most cases, this was done with public agencies inviting their nonprofit colleagues to participate, which created a public-private partnership. In all, 9 states were involved in the project, ranging from the Northeast to the Mid-Atlantic, South, Midwest, and West. All replication sites had to have an ability to meet the model, to be able to hire, especially during a pandemic, and be willing to be evaluated by our team at AdoptUSKids. And for more, I'm going to hand it back over to Alicia.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Let's move on to the next slide. Now you've heard just a brief overview of those program models that were part of this replication effort. We want you to hear directly from people from those programs so you can really learn more about them. So we're excited to have 3 speakers here, and let's go to the next slide. I'll just introduce all 3 of our speakers all at once, and then they will just flow from one to the next so we don't cut into their time as they're presenting. So first, you get to hear from Bob Friend, who's the director of the National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness. Following Bob, you'll hear from Tyler Helbach, director of Northwest Adoption Exchange. And then you'll hear from Jennifer Townsend, vice president of Children and Youth Programs at Foster Adopt Connect. So Bob Friend, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thanks, Alicia. Yes, Bob Friend, Director of National Institute for Permanent Family Connectedness at Seneca Family of Agencies. We're in our 11th year of our work as a program within Seneca. And I personally have been working with family finding interventions in a variety of capacities since 2006. So it's about 15 years now of training, delivering support, coaching, and otherwise supporting interventions that have helped young people be connected, be restoring family relationships, or helping develop new relationships so they can be connected, belong, and feel an ongoing support for now and ideally forever. Right. But the pieces that I really want to focus on after having, participated in this experience and worked with dozens, if not more, organizations across the country on different types of projects, including ones that were very child focused that, were evaluated and we've done all different types of work on, is I wanted to focus more on the network building part of family finding and the systems intervention piece. And that's what this project ended up becoming. It's not the only work that we do, but it's a developing piece of work that we do. And the reason is that these interventions are incredibly difficult to sustain. And that by the efforts that we've been doing all along to sustain them seem to be very subject to leadership changes and other sorts of system changes, whether it's resources or different focus from a sustainability perspective. And that's really because, we can go to the next slide, it's really because there's a serious conflict between the values of the practices that these projects are based on versus the values and historical tensions of the system. And so one of the pieces that I really like to be asking right now is, how do we change a system designed to protect children from their families to one that supports families to keep their children safe and healthy? And I think that's a fundamental and foundational system change. And I think it's the largest system change we've had since I've been working in the field now over 40 years. And I think this is by far and away the largest change that we face, because almost everything that we've designed our system to do, or the system has been designed to do, but we've trained and supported our folks to do, is almost diametrically opposed to now what we're intending the system to do. And so therefore, this requires an examination of the values, practice, policies, and procedures that serve to support the continuation of the system designed to protect children from their families in order to change that system for the better. And we can't limit these changes just to be tinkering around the edges. These are fundamental system changes. We go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about family finding, what family finding is, what people think it is. Having been involved with Kevin Campbell for a number of years in implementing and coaching the model, as well as making innovations and supporting his ongoing revisions, it's really clear to us that family finding, in order to just find placement, is a damaging practice. And that's because the damaging part is the part of that where we're continuing to work within the constructs and confines of the child welfare system to focus on placement rather on relationship development. And so that business as usual practice, I think gets implemented in different sites in different ways all across the country. If you ask folks what family finding is, you get a range of responses from, it's a search. We did our family finding, and family finding is not intended to be that way. Family finding, really, the purpose of family finding is it's a network building intervention. And so ultimately, when I ask folks if they're doing family finding, the test is, do you have a network that's going to be there to support the young person for free and forever? If you do, and that network is involved and has significant voice and access and power in determining what the plans are for that young person now and into the future, you're doing family finding. If you don't, then you're doing pieces of family finding or parts of family finding, but you're not really completing the intervention. The intervention is designed to be a network building intervention. So we want to create that robust asset base of support for every young person and family touched by the system. And that makes sure that, and here's the niche, here's the real strain of the intervention, and make sure that the asset base is respectfully engaged, welcomed, and encouraged to participate in the support of the young person while developing and determining their plans for the future. Kevin Campbell often talks about this as invited but not welcome. This can be achieved for every child in danger of or entering the system, as well as for children languishing in the system. The 21st century science over the last 5 years has been extraordinarily clear about the dangers that young people face when they are disconnected from the people that love and care about them and they love and care about, and that within weeks, we're starting to see damage in their DNA. So the isolation and loneliness that can be impacted by engagement in the child welfare system is harming people. I'm going to say that again. That's harming people. That's harming young people. And so if we know that, we have to stop doing it. And that's really part of the purpose of the intervention is, how do we make sure we know whether or not young people are well connected and have, as Dr. Perry talked about, relational wealth rather than being in a situation of relational poverty. Because in situations of relational poverty, even the best interventions don't work well. Even what's quote unquote evidence-based isn't working. So we go to the next slide. So this begins with a series of guiding principles and beliefs, right? That this practice is based on. And I don't believe our system operates with these same principles. And that's why there's such conflict between the types of interventions we're talking about and the system changes that are required. So, so part of where we really focus on is these basic guiding principles that families, beginning with their parents, are the primary asset needed for the health and safety of their children. And that families, beginning with their parents, are the foremost experts in their own lives and the lives of their kin. And therefore, all decision-making about family must include those family experts, beginning but not limited to parents. That really gets us to be thinking about what decisions do systems make that where this network of support, this team that the young person and parents and family are comprised of, and is not limited to relatives, by the way. Family is defined by each family that we engage with, we believe. How present are they in making those decisions? And if we're making decisions without them, that, by the way, the evidence shows that collaborative decision-making is superior to agency-centered decision-making. So whenever we're conducting agency-centered decision-making, we're not engaged in a practice that has strong evidence, yet we continue to do it. And why? So let's go to the next slide. So leadership and executive levels of the agency and partners, we need to establish and consistently hold this unwavering shared agreement to the accountability to these core values, and because that's essential to changing systems. When systems are not aligned with regard to these principles, families are harmed. Ignoring or avoiding the lack of alignment to these principles is to knowingly participate in the continuation of that harm that unnecessary separation and isolation inflicts. So the pieces that, and I think Bob is also going to speak to this a little bit later, the pieces that are really clear to us from working in sites all over the United States, and by the way, in Canada and Australia, is that system alignment actually has much more impact than the skills of any individual person. I can teach people to do wonderful family finding work, but if they're working in systems that don't value the contributions of the families that we're finding, it's really hard to create the impact, right? So it's really around how aligned are the system and the system partners to making sure that family are present, hold value, and have the opportunity to impact the plans on an ongoing basis for their young people, because they are the experts. It doesn't mean we don't have, as professionals, expertise. We should be collaboratively involved. But to avoid, ignore, push out, or marginalize families and their contributions is to actually participate in harming children, which we're not paid to do, and none of us want to. Go on to the next slide. So by examining the experience that families face, and including partners with lived experience in that examination, leaders can learn what practices, policies, routine decision-making, and operations currently support the involvement of families. So these are the kinds of things that I will often ask when working with sites, is what is the experience that families face, and how do you know? And whose voices are you listening to? Are you just looking at through the systems lens, or are you looking at through the people who experience that on an ongoing basis? To ask questions around what interferes with or deters family involvement. And so you can do things like process mapping and other activities to promote a clear picture of what's currently occurring, which can lead to the understanding of a design that what must be done to alter the unwelcoming paths to engagement, because this is all about engagement. Next slide. So, one of the pieces that we're, what evidence-based practice is supposed to be about is it's supposed to be stopping practices and practice theories even that no longer work or haven't worked, right? And so making sure that we're checking whether or not what we do has any merit or value, and eliminating the things that and models that separate or isolate family members, because we know that's harmful. So any practices that we are continuing to participate in which separate or isolate family members and limit or prevent communication with them have to be turned aside, have to be challenged, have to be revised. And finally, as a system, we need to determine what do we do to hold ourselves accountable for the historic racial inequality and disproportionality that has impacted families, communities, and tribes, and then take the necessary action to reverse these outcomes. We can't stand idly by. The social work code of ethics requires us to do no harm. We should aspire to more and settle for less, and settle for nothing less, sorry. Ensuring that families are essential participants in all child welfare decisions and actions would be a significant step to changing systems. Next slide. So again, back to the alignment. Alignment is at the core of the strategies. As I spoke about, I can get people to learn how to perform family finding work with high quote unquote fidelity. But if their system doesn't really welcome and involve the family members that you're finding, it's to little benefit. And often families get further marginalized as a result. If you've told 10 or 15 family members that they're important, but none of them are engaged or involved, why would they believe anything else that comes from folks that work in the system? So in this particular project, we were working with organizations to help them define what the success would look like in terms of a more inclusive engagement practice, conformity to legal requirements, addressing systems via implementation science approach to support the sustainability of the practice changes to better the outcomes for the children and families served. Next slide. So we teach a variety of engagement and involvement strategies to broaden the number of people known to the Child Welfare Agency, right? So it's essentially the discovery aspect of family finding, and then the initial engagement involvement. We teach tools, strategies, and activities in an experiential manner so that folks have the opportunity to observe, rehearse, and discuss what they're learning, practice the taught skills in between sessions, and receive and provide instructor coaching in the following session to promote integration of the new information. And those are the kind of things that NIPFC has been doing for the last 11 years and in a variety of other projects. Next slide. So, additional key strategies, we teach practice that supports the mattering of families to increase the likelihood of their involvement with kin impacted by the child welfare system, and to increase the identification and involvement of fathers and their relatives. And I will tell you that most of the systems that we've engaged with are still not doing a sufficient job of identifying who dad is, involving dad, and involving all of dad's relatives. So there are oftentimes when we're limiting by half the number of people that can potentially support young folks while they're in the child welfare system. So obviously there's lots of legal issues associated with that, but from a practical matter, again, we are harming children when we don't identify who their father is and engage their father's family, whoever are safe and supportive. We teach broaden and thicken practice of strengths identification to utilize and utilization to bolster iterations of strength-based practice. A lot of times folks tell me they do strength-based practice, and the test is, do your plans incorporate the strengths that were identified? And if your plans don't incorporate the youth and family strength, they're not strength-based. It doesn't matter if you're identifying strengths. If you're not utilizing those strengths and are not actively part of the plan, it's not strength-based practice. So next slide. And we teach a model that supports the identification of the underlying unmet needs of young people and profess the unequivocal need for each and every young person to have a lifelong network for free and forever to support them now and long after government interventions no longer needed or available. Next slide. So some of the things that we specifically did in these sites is we would meet with staff, sometimes in small groups, sometimes in larger groups, and have value-based conversations. We'd also sometimes even construct a word cloud of the values of what brought them to this practice and what keeps them in this practice. And then utilize those lists, because the lists in and of themselves are interesting, but they, again, the application is what's important. The practices in which the values are apparent and where the values are more opaque, becomes really important to say, where are our values present? How well are we communicating our values within our practice and procedures? And where do we want to focus on to either hold ourselves more accountable or to further illuminate those practices so that they're really apparent in what we do and why we do it? So in one site, one of the things that we did, that the site determined that they wanted to do, was they were having a real hard time with their reporting. And this was a probation site. And so they felt like their reporting and their court involvement work didn't feel to families like it was very transparent, like they were welcome, or that the information was consistently well received. And so they amended their court reporting, a series of court reporting templates in collaboration, and this gets back to the alignment piece, with the court and the legal partners. So they've developed more of an aligned system around what the information is important, what do they need and what don't they need, because they felt like sometimes they were just reiterating the worst part of the stories of the young person without really, and the family, without really expressing the better part. And so it was an unbalanced contribution on a recurring basis. And also that they felt they spent too much time in doing things that weren't really necessary or well received. And so, but through series of meetings with the presiding judge and the other legal partners, they were able to craft new templates. And they also reached out to other organizations across the state to find out what they were doing that could be better. And so that's one of the pieces that, in terms of creating better practice and also establishing system alignment. Another organization, next slide. Another organization we engaged with was, we were asking them to significantly, what would it take to significantly increase the family member participation in the initial first 60 days of child and family team meetings, and then in all subsequent meetings, right? So that the family experts are welcome to develop plans. So we've been having ongoing conversations with each unit within the child welfare organization about what are the kinds of things that they think they need to do. And then we're going to roll that up into a leadership conversation about the ideas that are crafted within the investigations unit, within the 2-6 unit, the permanency planning unit, the adoptions unit, all the ongoing units, to pull together their best ideas moving forward, and then figure out how do we improve alignment within these agencies in the system. And we're already on a schedule to meet with the court in a meeting between the child welfare and the court that's coming up in the fall. So, that's kind of wrapping up. I think next slide might be the last one. Yeah. So some of the other things that have happened is organizations have participated in process mapping to take a look at how decisions are currently being made and what they would want to make sure that the child and family team meetings, which are a core construct in California service delivery, how to make sure that all the decisions made about the young person happens in those meetings. Right. So, and not happening in staffings or individually by workers at desks or in consultation with their supervisors, but actually it's collaborative practice. Right. We've worked on we've provided training to improve engagement skills, determine how existing searching for family practices and results can be more consistently utilized, especially following person-to-person transfers, and participate in court and attorney conversations to strengthen alignment and common understanding of the practices. So I think that sort of wraps it up. Next slide. Yeah. So we're happy to answer more questions when we get to the Q&A, but for now, let's hand it off to Tyler, who's going to share his creative storytelling project. Take it away, Tyler.
Thanks, Bob. Hey, everybody. Tyler Hellbach. I'm the director at Northwest Adoption Exchange. We're a program of Northwest Resource Associates, and Northwest Adoption Exchange, we do recruitment and help with some permanency planning work here in Washington and also in Alaska and Oregon. Today, I'm really excited to talk about our Indepth Profiles project, which some folks have mentioned are creative kind of storytelling projects, oftentimes video, not always video. We'll talk just a little bit about that. Our Indepth Profiles are, we were just really, really happy that we got to kind of pilot this work in both Michigan and Oregon as part of the Family Finding Initiative. And, huge thanks to AdoptUSKids and I guess in terms of Children's Bureau and then also our partners in those states. So let's dive in a little bit to what we did and what are Indepth Profiles. If you want to move to the next slide. So Indepth Profiles are a recruitment tool or a strategy, a program that's really built on 2 questions. And these are questions that we ask youth directly. We have youth engagement specialists on our staff who meet with youth, who pitch them on these ideas, who talk with them about sharing their story. And we ask 2 questions. We say, what do you want to share with potential families and how do you want to share that? And for each one of those questions, there's limitless possibilities. But so a couple of examples on what youth might want to share with potential families. So that could be hobby, that could be a strength, right? Maybe a youth loves to cook, right? We might help them make a cooking tutorial or share some of their favorite recipes. Maybe they're an artist. They might decide they want to share their art. Maybe they just want to share some of their hopes and dreams for the future. So we might have a project that's really future, looking forward into the future, right? Maybe they really want to share pieces of their identity that are important to them. We would work with them on that. Or maybe they might want to go kind of more traditional in the recruitment space, and they might want to share what kind of family they're really looking for, what kind of support they're looking for in the future. I want to stress that happens some, but that oftentimes doesn't happen too. We have lots of Indepth Profiles that aren't really adoption or permanency centered as well. So, and then the second aspect there is what's really fun, I think, and that's the how do you want to share it? And so that's where we work with youth and say, let's dream up whatever you want it to be, right? If it's that cooking tutorial, if you love music, let's put your playlist on the profile. Like if you love basketball, let's make your trick shot highlight video. Let's do whatever you want to do. And it's really youth driven and youth led. And we get to be as creative as possible. If you love Harry Potter, let's do a podcast about Harry Potter, whatever it could be, right? Whatever is important to them is where we want to take the project. Next slide. So just a little bit of background on Indepth Profiles. The model was started in collaboration with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families here in Washington in 2017. We piloted it with the department here and then have kind of looked to grow it. This was a great opportunity for us to test the model in some other environments. We were really happy with how it turned out. The model serves 13 youth 13 and older who want to participate and have the ability to kind of co-lead or lead a project. Those are our requirements, and were our requirements when we started this project. Right now, our requirements are that they have, hey, can you go see mama? Right now, our requirements are that in Washington, we're expanding to 9. So also, they have to have concurrent goals of engagement, empowerment, and permanency. Family finding expansions also have to include pilot states in Michigan and Oregon. Hold on 1 second, buddy. Sorry, I got the 3-year-old running in. Can we go to the next slide? This is our process. So they have to identify potential youth, they have to engage with youth, and they have to create with youth, or we create with the youth, right? So our staff engage directly with those youth. They work on finding with our partners on the ground. So in Michigan, that was the Michigan Adoption Resource Exchange, and in Oregon, that was the Oregon Adoption Resource Exchange. And we worked with those folks, and tried to say, who are the youth that you've been serving that would be a really good fit for our model? And so we identified those, and then the engage process is super important. where we need to go and engage with youth. And as I mentioned before, just directly ask them, say, hey, do you want to participate in this? What do you think about telling your story? And if some youth might say no, some say yes. In our experience, most youth do want to be engaged. Then we work on that creative aspect where we create the content, review the content with youth. They give final approval, which is a very important piece of our model. And then we integrate with whatever the current recruitment systems are there to kind of share and respond, share the content and respond to families. We can go to the next slide. So a couple of core principles about our in-depth profiles, and then we'll talk more about the expansion or the pilot work through the Family Finding Initiative. One of our core beliefs, right, is that the first goal of any youth involvement should be their engagement and empowerment in the process, and not just once, but ongoing. And even though in-depth profiles are kind of an intervention that focuses on one big project or one big profile, we really like to think about the model as kind of setting the stage or kickstarting engagement and empowerment and recruitment, right? And so we love to bring the team together and say, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to get the youth involved, but then how is that going to continue on? How does the youth know that we are, what's going on on their behalf? How are we going to keep them involved and engaged in this process once the profile's over? Another one of our core principles that we found as kind of a recruitment agency is that when we present youth with opportunities that they want to participate in, they say yes, right? And that seems really redundant, but I think what happens a lot of time in this space is that the opportunities that we're providing to youth are actually opportunities they don't want to engage in, and we probably wouldn't have wanted to engage in as a youth either, right? I think of something like, I know it doesn't happen as much now, but the idea of like sitting down and maybe writing a potential letter to like a family or something like that, right? Like that's homework, right? That's not something that youth really want to do anymore, right? But if we can think of different ways to create those opportunities for engagement and listen to how youth want to engage, I think we can usually get them to a place where they're really not just that they say yes, but they're really excited to engage in the permanency planning or recruitment process. So next slide. All right, so a couple more key principles here. So youth deserve a seat at the table. We all, I'm sure, agree on that. That's why we're here. The next one is that adults on the team, we need to be collaborative and we need to be speaking the same language. So that's really important in all permanency planning or family finding work, but I think it's really important for our model too. As I mentioned, our staff go out there and we kind of pitch and we talk with youth about what a project's going to be. It's really important that the other youth on that team, or the other adults on the youth team, know what that is as well. So that when we go out and we say, hey, here's what an in-depth profile is, we're going to meet with you 4 or 5 times. So this is going to be creative. We're going to dream up whatever you want. Here's how we're going to share it. Here's how you're going to be involved. You know, all these different things. That when we leave and that teen asks the foster parent or their social worker or their case aide or whatever it is, like, hey, what was this thing? Can you like answer some questions? That those people are also able to answer the questions, right? You know, you may have heard this with unpacking the no, you know, but what we like to say is like, if you unpack the no, like, let's make sure we're all speaking the same language so somebody doesn't pack it back in, right? And then the last principle on this slide is super important to us. And it's this idea that if we don't talk with youth about permanency and specifically recruitment, they're going to at best have misconceptions about what's going on, and at worst they're going to think nothing's going on at all. So what that looks like in reality is that, you know, on the misconception side, you might be working with a team who thinks your sole job is to just call families and find them an adoptive family, right? Like, and that's what you're doing every day, right? And they don't really understand what the breadth of your job is or what your role is or whatever it might be. And so you can imagine that they'd be really frustrated and disappointed by a lack of progress on that. That's really sad. But what's even more tragic is if there's a team that you're working with that thinks you're not doing anything for them at all, right? And so we really preach being honest and optimistic with youth, but especially that honesty and talking with the details, right? And I think that's something that In-Depth Profiles does a really good job of is setting the stage for us to have realistic conversations about, we're going to make this profile, here's who's going to see it, here's what's going to happen next, here's how you can be involved and engaged. And is something we've really tried to build the program around or build the model around. Next slide. Cool. So now we talked about the fun stuff. So our replication effort. So the Family Finding Initiative allowed us to pilot sites in Michigan and Oregon. I mentioned we worked with kind of adoption exchanges on the ground there in the states there, and we were really excited about that. In Michigan, there was a larger project. In Oregon, it was a smaller project. And like everything in this world, engagement in the collaborative work with youth turned fully remote very quickly. We managed to sneak out on a plane right when everything was getting bad, and we were in Michigan for some training time, which was great. And we met with some youth and got to visit with the Michigan Adoption Resource Exchange people, the mayor people there, right before everything totally shut down. And then we pivoted all of our almost all of our in-depth profile work to remote work. And we also were able to work with the staff there to really not just complete a set amount of projects for youth, but also to work to build capacity, like Bob was talking about earlier, but build capacity so they could continue to do in-depth profile work if they so chose. Can you do next slide? Thanks. So as I mentioned a little bit, the intervention or the program is really, especially during this period, was really geared towards teens. So we worked with youth who were an average age of 15 in Michigan and 13 in Oregon. And then we have concurrent goals, right, of permanency, engagement, empowerment. You know, we're kind of both working on the on engaging and involving youth, but also in generating more options, right, to help build that support network. And to help have families come forward. And so we measure our effectiveness in a couple different ways, but one of those ways is the number of inquiries. And so for youth who participated, the number of families that came forward increased by over 200%. And we measure that from prior to the profile and after the profile. One of the things that I thought was really important to mention is that in Michigan, where we have the largest sample size, so that's where most of this data is going to come from, is that the youth that we were working with had been on their exchange or had been receiving recruitment services for, on average, over 2.5 years, right? So we were working with youth who almost all in group care, who, you know, teens who we'd been doing a lot of really good work, and we needed to kind of jumpstart and look for alternative ways to kind of do some recruitment stuff. And one of the things we're obviously most excited about is that within 6 months of completing the pilot in Michigan, 55% of the youth who completed an in-depth profile were either matched with, had either been matched with or had an identified adoptive family that they were going to move forward. So we're very excited about that. Next slide. A couple of the kind of paradigm shifts that we saw, and I know there's oftentimes questions about our model, and we're happy to hit those at the end. So go ahead and throw those in the chat if you're interested. But the paradigm shifts that we were kind of looking for, that we were really excited about, was an increased focus on involving youth in the approval and review process. And so in both states that we worked, they had actually been doing some really good work and had some foundation for some creative ways that they were involving youth in the process to create content and reach out to families. But one of the things that we were really excited to help build was that capacity, not just for that initial involvement, but for the approval and review process, right? Because those are really important, we think, to really achieve empowerment, right, is to get the youth sign off that says, yep, I'm pleased with how this looks, or I want to edit it this way, or I want to change it that way. And so we were really excited to see some of that shift. We also were obviously happy about the effectiveness we saw in terms of the data that we saw. And then I think also, you know, with any model, you never know how it's going to perform, how the work is going to be when extraordinary circumstances come up. We certainly all had to deal with that. Everybody on this call or on the webinar, all of you in the field. And so we were really, we felt really encouraged by the fact that we were able to serve just as many youth as we said we were going to serve, that we were able to engage and empower youth in ways that we felt was, similar to if we had been there in person. We had, we had COVID, we had wildfires going on. It was a rough 8 months or 9 month period or whatever it was. But, I think that learning that engagement was still possible during those times really just solidified and really cemented our belief that this is the right way to move forward, which is to engage youth and empower them in this process, kind of no matter what. Next slide. Yeah, and then this was just one of our recent profiles. I think it's just this quote kind of captures this idea of not about us without us, which I think we can take to a lot of permanency planning environments, but is really something that we're just thrilled that we were able to bring that through this initiative to some of these other states and try it out where they're still doing some of this work, and we're really excited about that. I see a couple questions. I know we're going to get to those later on, but now I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer to talk about Extreme Family Fun.
Hello, thank you guys so much. Yes, I am Jennifer Townsend. I'm the Vice President of Children and Youth Programs at Foster Adopt Connect. Foster Adopt Connect just had our 20th anniversary last year. We began as a foster parent advocacy agency, and now we kind of run the gamut. Our CEO likes to say if there's a gap in services for abused and neglected children or their families, that we just really attempt to fill it. So I am over our Extreme Family Finding, our 30 Days to Family, as well as our FAC original CCYP program, which is for youth who are foster care alumni. It's staffed by foster care alumni, and it helps with that transition into young adulthood. Next slide, please. All right, so we are going to jump in. I know a lot of you were able to join us for that initial presentation. As was mentioned earlier, we do recruitment for highest needs children in foster care. We have, only are working with children who are 10 or above, part of a large sibling group, have documented mental health and or behavioral concerns. Those kids that really, really need us. We wish we had the capacity to serve every single child with who cannot reunify with their biological parents, but unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to do that. So we keep it at the very, very highest needs children. We are led by a few integral key concepts and beliefs in our work. One of them is that childhood is very short. We know the people on this call know that it takes a lot of effort and oftentimes a lot of time to get a child from, not having contact with important relatives, family members and kin, to having that contact, to potentially being placed, to potentially finding permanency, whether that means relational permanency and or legal permanency. But we as workers have to be led by this knowledge, not belief, because it's just a fact. Really, childhood is so short in the, in comparison to the rest of our lives. And so when we're working with kiddos, we have to work with urgency and always pressing forward. What is the next step? What is the next step? What is the next step? As we attempt to heal them, heal the family, and attempt to get the family to a place of healthy normalcy. Kind of going along with that, every child has the right to a connection with their family and deserves a permanent, loving home. And so, our peers earlier were saying how we really need to get back to looking at the family as a unit that can heal children and, heal themselves, and not always treating it as a malady that we have to take the children away from. We understand that children cannot have connections to every single family member, but every single family has healthy family members that can bring a lot to the child, to their development, to their sense of self. They deserve that. That's their right. They also deserve the stability and the love of a permanent home. And that can mean legal permanency, but it doesn't always mean legal permanency. We're just talking about stability. We're talking about knowing that the person who is there for you today, I can trust and believe that that person is going to be there for me in a year, in 5, 10 years into the future, that's still going to be somebody that I can depend on, regardless of, what my individual future looks like. This was also mentioned earlier. I really love when I present on these that I am getting to meet with peers and hear from peers whose individual programs are so different from my own, but I know that we share so many values at the foundation of our programs, and such that our programs could really work in tandem because we have so many of the same core beliefs. And one of them really is that we define our family very, very broadly. So, yes, we're talking about biological family, but kinship resources, I'll be personal. I'm a member of the queer community, the LGBTQ community, and we have a long, long history of making our own family when biological family is not always welcoming. And so long before I got involved with foster care and adoption, I already had it set in my mind that family really is what you make it. And so we try very, very hard to engage the youth, listen to the youth who they see as their family, when we're developing a relationship with them. And on that note too, just that every person in the child's life can offer assistance. So we get a lot of pushback sometimes. Bob Friend was talking about kind of our systems and the people that we're public partners we're working with. And we do get pushback sometimes when they say, I've already spoken with the family and the family is not appropriate, or even individuals, oh, don't speak to this aunt because she is inappropriate or she's never helped before. That is not a deterrent to us. We can sometimes take a different approach, or just not being the public agency, being an outsider sometimes can help. And then that belief that no matter what, if someone's willing to meet with us, then they have something to share, and we need to be there and listen. Ready for the next slide? All of that is really built on, this genuine empathy and care. Again, on a personal note, just myself and a lot of the staff members from the original Extreme Family Finding team are not only foster and adoptive parents, but have been relative placements or have been placed in a relative placement. My mother was a relative provider for a cousin when I was younger. And so those kind of aspects can really help give perspective, and perspective we can then share with our peers that maybe do not have that personal piece in working with our relatives. We also have to all agree, sort of that theory of change, that belief that people can change, that they want to succeed, that they do the best they can with what they have. If you don't think that's true, you're in the wrong business. Foster care is all about, how can I help this family become whole again? What can I do to support them? And believing that they can, improve the situation for the betterment of the children involved. Behaviors have a purpose, often the symptom of unmet needs. We know that for children. We need to remind ourselves that is sometimes true for adults as well. When we're working with adults and we might be getting some resistance, let's try to think about where that could be coming from, and that children heal in families. Next slide. We're going to get into some of our strategies. I will keep this pretty simple. First of all, as was already noted, we work with private investigators. So our actual extreme family finders are the one that kind of case manage the recruitment for our kiddos, but they partner very, very closely with our private investigators. Typically, we're working with individuals who are retired police officers. We have 3 at one location right now who all worked for their city's unit for over 20 years, but across our other sites in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Kansas, we've also employed private investigators who have been in the field for many years. The recruiters and the private investigators work together to do case mining, as well as, I should have included on here, data mining, utilizing paid and unpaid websites to find, locate relatives to get started. And I really, really push, those are great for getting names and getting addresses and whatnot, but we're trying to meet with people in person as quickly as we possibly can. So that's where the interviews come in. Building up a skill set for interviews is so important. Knowing that when we're interviewing individuals, we need to be very focused on our time with them, very engaged, active listening, not scheduling something too close to when you're meeting with them. Just really trying to connect person to person with them as you're getting information, and trying to keep it a little bit more conversational rather than task oriented. And then social media, I always joke with people when they learn about our program or when they're interviewing for our program that you do get paid to Facebook stalk. So if you like to Facebook stalk, this might be the job for you. It's an excellent place to start, primarily when perhaps the biological parents are not engaged at first. We try to meet with the biological parents as soon as possible and kind of start from there, because most of our best information comes from interviews with the adults that are closest to the child. But if we get a case where maybe the child's been in care for many years and there's really not a bridge there, sometimes we can get started with that social media, especially Facebook. Next slide, please. Again, we are working with urgency. Childhood is short. That said, one thing I want to say is, as much as we work with urgency and try not to put off for tomorrow what can be done today, we don't have a hard deadline for when that needs to take place, because it's really a process for every child. Every family is different. And so we are working with urgency. What's the next step? What's the next step? But that doesn't necessarily mean that those things have to occur in a concrete timeline. Going the distance is really both figurative and literal. So figuratively, we love a puzzle. We love to get a problem and try to find a solution. If you don't have room in your home, we'll build a home. I knew no home improvement skills before I got involved, and now I can, put a new door on and build a wall where there wasn't one. We've gotten cars for people, whatever we need to do, but literally, I believe that the public partners that we work with really love that we're able to cross state lines. So if we find a relative who is maybe we're in Kansas and they're in Oklahoma, that we're able to pop over there, meet with them in person for the interview, go ahead and do a home walkthrough, just gather a lot of information before we even discuss the ICPC, because that really helps that process along. And those of you who have done an ICPC know how tedious that can be. And so it really just helps us to jumpstart that process. Advocacy. I mean, we're pushing back against business as usual. That includes case-by-case advocacy, as well as legal and systems approach advocacy. And then the bulk of the work really is in that ongoing meaningful engagement and support. Like my peers have said really on this webinar, it's not a one-time thing, it's ongoing, it's developing relationships. Next slide, please. Some of our successes here, and just in numbers, that we have the collective almost 2,400 relatives on our cohort genograms. We've seen 40 reconnections, 38 matches, 1 adoption, with a dozen more in process. And I'm really happy about this. I know we don't we don't always talk about reunifications on here because we do serve children for whom the teams have decided reunification is no longer an option, but we are oftentimes finding biological fathers who did not know they had children in care, or we're meeting with parents who 5 years ago, they didn't have a support system, and with our support, we can kind of bring the family together to be a support system for them, and they are able to then reunify. And so that's in percentages, that's about 76% matches, about 80% reconnections. And I know that we're kind of zeroing in on time, but one of my favorite stories from our partners in Rhode Island was they were working with a set of twins who were both diagnosed with autism and had very, very high needs. And they are either have just been moved or are very soon moving into a house with their aunt and uncle, who are their adoptive resources, and another aunt and uncle that are moving into the house as well, so that the two sets of aunts and uncles can work together to raise these children and support one another all in the same home. And I just think that that's a really good example of how families can look different and still be very successful and healthy. Next slide. So setting the stage for replication, again, Bob Friend was discussing, we really need to, it's ideal to work in a setting where the people we're working with do support relative connections, placements, and permanency, that it's not just a box to be checked off, like, yep, parents gave me a list of 5 relatives. I talked to those 5 relatives and, now I'm done, that we're really, really getting in there. And that when we find someone who just needs a little help to get there, that we're supporting that. That has to include leadership from buy-in at the agency, as well as our public partners. We know that a lot of public partners across the nation right now are experiencing kind of unprecedented turnover. Supervisors and supervisors are carrying cases in some places. And so we're trying to take more off the table of our case managers, try to take some off of their plate, but we can't do the work without them. We still have to have that. Engagement, that teamwork. And, kind of lastly, just wanted to note that the agents, the workers on the front line doing this work have to have the support for their agency. And that means not just being assigned these tasks and getting like a one-time training, but rather being given ongoing training, the tools to do the work, as well as the time to do the work. So I'll leave it at that and send it over to Alicia.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks all 3 of you for your fantastic presentations and so much good information, even though I know we could spend, a day and a half hearing just about any one of your programs, and you packed so much good information into that brief time. I was collecting multiple questions as you all were presenting, so we'll get to those in the Q&A. But I want to stay on this topic of implementation and sustainability a little bit, because I think one of the things that we often do in this field, and we often see in webinars especially, is here are a bunch of great strategies, but then we're not really helping people think about how to really embed things into their work. So we want to devote a little bit of time here to that implementation and sustainability lens. I'm wondering, I guess, just sort of to open this up to all of you, Bob, Hearn, as well as our 3 program presenters. Are there things that come to mind for you of tips or key considerations that you think people out working in the field really need to think about for implementing these kind of family finding and engagement approaches, or planning for sustainability?
So how about I start, Alicia, just from what we saw from the evaluations of the 4 projects. Those projects that had the greatest success, there were some patterns that we saw, and one was engagement, obviously youth engagement that we've been talking about there, but really engagement at every level. Those public systems that reached out to their private systems, and the private systems that engaged well with their public systems. There was that joint commitment to move forward, and we've seen that most of those projects are still operating after the grant process has ended. I believe all 4 sites in extreme family finding are still up and working with that private-public partnership. And what we really saw that worked well in some places where it didn't was when our folks who were replicating these models were talking not just to their public systems, but to other child welfare agencies that were also working with these children and youth. And so there was an understanding that they were all working together for the betterment of the youth. And for those people, for those models that took the time to really engage both with the public system as well as other organizations that were working with the youth, had really good outcomes. And those models that came in and there was no engagement with the larger child welfare system or who was involved in that child or youth's life really struggled. So I think that's a really important tip when you're coming, when you're bringing in a model to replicate, or you are the replicator, to make sure that you are dealing with all of the systems and all of the people that are involved in that child and that youth's life to really understand, and so everyone can work together on that. I think Bob really talked really strongly about that, how important it is to have everybody involved, and how important it is to have family involved as well, and birth family involved. And the more that we're able to engage all the people that care about this child or youth in their life, the better outcomes we're going to have. And now I'll bring it to our individual partners.
Great, thanks, Bob.
If I could just kind of go off what Bob said there a little bit, I think what we found related to implementation and sustainability is that it's so helpful when folks have done some work around putting together their plan or what their unified kind of theory is, or theory of change around some of this work, that, you know, when you have kids in your system and you don't have an identified home, what's the plan? What are you going to do, right? And so many times I think we build systems that we get to that point of saying we don't have any options, but we don't have a plan for generating the options, right? Or whatever it might be. So I think where we found a lot of success was people who are open to saying, all right, here's all of the landscape that we're working in. And here are the strategies and the interventions that we're currently working on. And here's where you can fit in, right? So that we can say, well, when youth get to this point, when we've been doing recruitment for this long, or when we know that they don't have an identified permanency option right now, that, you know, we can have X, Y, and Z as plans, as strategies that we can use. So I think where we've really seen success is with partners who are willing to kind of do that work and look big picture and say, okay, well, how are we going to build out this menu of options so that we can serve kids no matter where they're at, right? And I think that's what really leads to, in our experience, sustainability, is getting that larger theory, getting that menu of options kind of in place and having everybody agree on it.
Thanks, Tyler. That's really helpful. And that ties into a theme that I think I hear from all three of you in your programs, and from what Bob was saying, that this idea of really having that broader view and those guiding principles and the underlying philosophy and the alignment that Bob Friend talked about. I mean, I think that's such a key piece. And even though you all may have used slightly different words, that was something that really came out to me in what you all shared, is that is so crucial to then guide and really have that foundation for doing the ongoing work. And I'd imagine for sustaining the work, that people understand the why behind it and the shared values and beliefs guiding it. So I think it's a great point to make. Jennifer, Bob, anything else you want to add about the implementation or sustainability considerations?
Yeah, a couple quick things. I mean, we could just talk about this, you know, for the remaining time, but just to, you know, kind of pinpoint a couple. One is that implementation science has really been clear around the importance of a leadership implementation team that guides installation of really changing practice. And so that requires, in some ways, that system alignment for leaders, not just within the system, but across systems, to ensure the support and the the exploration and development of that practice, right? So to get everyone on the same page. And so as system barriers are being elevated and identified, it allows you to better navigate those, and also to take a look procedurally at why are they continuing to get in the way. So that's one thing. And the other thing that we've spent a fair amount of time doing over the last few years is, how do we help supervisors better manage to the ideas and principles that the three of us have all talked about, right? So there's different little applications in each separate intervention, but people, you can conduct training all day long. People behave as they're supervised, not as they're trained. And so we can provide great training, but if you go back to supervision and it's the same questions and the same focus all the time, which is dealing with crises and placement rather than relationships and getting to know people and who the people who are important to them, then you're not really going to implement the practice. So how do you help support supervisors to be able to change the way they supervise and the way they report up, so that you can actually do some of those system change and maintain the focus on the intervention beyond the training period or beyond the brief installation period?
Great. Thanks, Bob. Jennifer, not to put you on the spot, but anything to add?
Well, like Bob said earlier, we have been able to maintain all of our sites. And I think one of the things that has helped us is the inclusion of our program in some of the state's diligent recruitment strategies for the year. And I think another thing that has probably helped is that, thank goodness, we're having more and more states pay attention to the disproportionality of Black and Brown children in foster care, and how relative placements and relative permanency, and just, like I said, relative connections, how those can help those children, remain in contact with their families, as well as, potentially being placed or adopted by those family members, how that helps their sense of self, how that helps their sense of culture and whatnot. So I think that those things have kind of worked together really well. I know our Kansas site just started a 4-year contract to, work in Kansas under EFF. So pretty proud of them.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. And I think that connection to diligent recruitment is so important as we think about the requirements with diligent recruitment, really to be looking at building that pool of families that reflect the diversity of children who are in foster care, and that doing that kind of that family finding, that true engagement, that recognizing kinship connections or potential kinship connections is such a key way to think about that it's more than just having some targeted recruitment strategies, but really having those robust ways of thinking about how do we find families who really have existing connections with our children in care and who reflect that diversity. So thanks for raising that. I also just wanted to highlight a comment in the chat. I mean, hopefully everyone's been following along in the chat, but Bob, friend, to your point about the key role of supervision, someone made a comment about diversity in the ranks of supervision, and not to put words in the mouth of the person who made that comment, but I think it is such a key point, thinking about how that supervisor role is so crucial, and what they're talking about, and what expertise and what lenses and what backgrounds they bring, and that diversity of what our supervisors look like and have lived. I mean, it is such a key piece to really shaping the work. Thank you all for chiming in with those thoughts. I think it really does help people think about how to ground some of these ideas that you shared in their work, and what those key considerations are. We do have several questions, so I want to make sure we get to those. So I'm going to move towards the question and answer time here. And some of these came in aimed at individual presenters, but I may also expand a little bit to see if anyone else wants to chime in. One is for Tyler. Someone asked about how you manage frustration or disappointment from youth who don't have a match after they have created their own video or other format of material for sharing what they want to share.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I won't throw it back as another question, but I will say that I think that frustration about not having a match probably resides for youth in care regardless on if they've done an in-depth profile or not, right? It's just maybe unspoken. And I would rather have us engaging with youth and kind of, helping set the context of those discussions, right? So that we can circle back and we can talk about that. So it does happen, that definitely does happen some, but I think, if a youth comes back to us, what we say is like, all right, let's engage again. Let's like update again. Let's do something. What's new with you? Like, how would you like to kind of refresh or work on this some more? And then we can share it out. Do you have any ideas of how you'd want to get it out or whatever it might be? So I totally get that that is a challenge, but I think I would say that that's an opportunity. And I would also say that that's an opportunity that doesn't really present itself if we don't engage at all, right? It's just kind of an unspoken grinding kind of sort of trauma almost. So I think, one last thing I'll say on that is that's why it's really, really important that this is the beginning of a conversation and an engagement process, and it's not just a one-off, right? Because we're not always going to be in that youth's life, right? So we need them to be able to continually have those discussions and say, hey, I'm frustrated, like to their worker or whatever it might be. And I actually love when you say that, because I don't think youth do enough to hold us accountable on their behalf, right? And so I think it would be great if more teens were knocking down the doors and saying, hey, you got it, like, come on, do your job, find me some options here. So anyway, so we look at that as an opportunity in our program and within our model.
Thanks, Tyler. I want to open that up and maybe expand the question a little bit to anyone else who wants to respond, because to me, it also raises the question of how can we better prepare youth for the family finding or profiles or photo listing, or we do all of these strategies, but thinking about that preparation piece and the expectation setting. So I'm wondering if any of you, Bob or Jennifer, if any of you want to add anything to that question or that topic.
For the most part, really, it's the same as Tyler. If the youth we're working with, if they can talk, then we should be talking. If they can have the conversation, then we should be having the conversation. That can look different, a little bit different from kiddo to kiddo, but part of that relationship, part of that rapport is sharing what we're doing in ways that are appropriate, and just helping them understand and preparing them for what's next. That's our job. It can be uncomfortable, but that's our job. So
Alicia, we part of what we do is we train our engagement activity, our engagement skills in activities, experiential work, back and forth with the cohort of folks that we're working with, so they get a sense of what to do. Because it's one thing to ask people or to have people describe; it's another thing to have people participate. So, specifically regarding the voice and the experience of young people, it's still not consistent that folks actually think about asking young people who's important to them, who have participated with them in the past, who they trust, rely on, those kind of things. And there's different ways experientially to do that beyond just a question and answer thing. There's sort of, play and other kinds of activities that help in that regard. And so by engaging folks in that, you get to a better level about what their comfort level is and what their internal barriers or fears or concerns are around raising those kind of questions, because people still get stuck in, well, I'm worried the young person is going to get triggered by thinking about something in their past. And it's like, well, don't you think about something in their past every night when they go to bed, and every morning when they wake up, and every time they see a family on TV or they hear a story in school? These memories are flooding them all the time. You're giving them the opportunity to speak to them and to identify healing opportunities, right? So it's around engagement, around relationships, around speaking the unspoken and all those sorts of things. And we can't do enough of it. That's sort of echo what both Tyler and Jennifer are saying. It's part of the work is to speak to these things as opposed to ignore them and then feel like they get solved by our not talking about them, which, there's no evidence to support that theory.
I agree with what everyone has said here. I think one of the most challenging things when you work in child welfare, and also one of the most important, is to sit with the challenges that is part of of loss and part of trauma, and showing that that's part of relationship building, which is an important part of youth engagement, is sitting with anybody in any part of our lives through challenges and through grief and through loss. And it's something that sometimes we avoid opportunities for youth because it's challenging for us for a worker to see somebody in such pain. But it's working through that pain that also provides that opportunity, and such an important part and special part of working in child welfare.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all. I knew you would have good answers to that question, but that was even better than I expected. So thank you all for jumping in on that. I want to merge a couple of questions that we received, because I think they're maybe touching on some similar questions here. So we had one of these was for you, Bob Friend, and one was for Jennifer, but I'm going to combine them here. But someone was wondering if you can talk a bit about how to bridge family engagement with different sides of the family that don't get along. And then the other question was, what different approaches can you take if you're bumping into a barrier of being told certain family or members or individuals shouldn't be contacted, or there's no point in contacting to them? So whether it's you're hearing it from one side of the family that, you know, the aunt on the other side of the family shouldn't be contacted, or those kinds of dynamics. I'm wondering if you can speak to tips for that, or how you navigate that.
Sure, Lisa. I'll take a crack at starting it again. That's a 45-minute presentation.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes them great questions. So a couple of the nuances of it is, I want to talk about the sort of like who the appropriate relatives, right? Who people think are appropriate. And some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but I really challenge the notion that child welfare has any business in determining who's appropriate. It's not written in any code. You don't remove children from parents who aren't appropriate. You remove around safety and danger and harm. You don't remove around appropriate. And so I don't think we have any business figuring out who's appropriate in people's lives. That's the family's job. Our job is to figure out who's safe. And so I often ask people to substitute the word safe for appropriate in the way they're assessing and determining who should be involved in a young person's life, because I think appropriate is really, there's lots of institutional racism and bias all embedded in the word appropriate, because what's appropriate for me is different than appropriate than all 112 participants that are now in this chat. And so it's a very institutionally held and I think white middle class held perspective, and I think it just creates such bias around certain principles that are not that may make sense in my culture and my family, but that's it, and which has little overlap for the experiences of hundreds and thousands of other people, millions of other people. So that's one of the things I like to challenge, is what's safe and what's appropriate, and let's see if we can swap that out. The second piece is around, it depends what your intervention is. If your intervention is to build a network, then the relationship building is around this young person should have equal access and equal rights to their father's side of the family, in this particular circumstance, as they do their mother's side of the family. So we preferencing one person because they are committing to be a placement, but they're committing to be a placement as long as they don't have to engage with the other half of the family. Is that an ongoing solution that's really useful? Now, it doesn't mean we're at yes or no. It means more engagement, more involvement, more questions, more exploration, right? More comfort in developing relationships that support the young person. But one of the practices that we do is we identify a sense in a meeting structure around what are the underlying unmet needs of the youth, and using the family as broadly defined to help figure out how they can support the young person meeting those needs, right? And so the solutions that have to be geared to meeting the young person's needs, rather than I want to, it's my house, or any of that kind of stuff. And I think those, and we call that a blended perspective meeting. Kevin Campbell developed that in the early 2000s, and I think that intervention really helps center around what's the support that the youth need in order to be healthy and safe and grow up in a flourishing environment, right? Rather than whose placement is it? And so I think those are the two constructs that I'd use to get us started.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I completely agree. It actually reminded me of something that I was thinking about this weekend. We have adopted 3 children from foster care, but we were very lucky in assisting, supporting another little one to be reunified, a sibling. And I heard from various misguided folks, oh, well, the child would have been better with you. And we hear that all the time. And I'm going to have that awkward conversation and say, I'm going to stop you right there. Says who says that this child is better with this individual or that individual? Someone could look at my children and say that someone else could give them a better life, and they would be right, because I'm not perfect either. And so really changing the conversation around that, starting with relatives, but including all the different possible permanency and placement resources. I would say specifically when I'm having conversations about, oh, I don't want this person to be included, I don't want that person to be included, I just want to know the specifics. What are your specific concerns? I love what Bob said about changing that verbiage. I'm actually going to steal that and start saying that myself, because I want to dig in and ask more questions. What are your specific concerns for this person? 9 times out of 10, they have trouble even verbalizing what the actual concerns for the person are. But if they do give us some concerns, then that's fine. That's just the starting point. What would help you feel more comfortable with us engaging this person? So what are you worried about? What are you scared of? What are the concerns? And what can we do to help you feel more comfortable with this? And I also like to loop back around. The focus is the child, and this is what I'm hoping to achieve by speaking with this person. I think that some people get it in their heads that we're just going to stick a child, wherever. If someone says that they want to take placement of the child, then that's good enough. Obviously, that's not how anybody should be doing the work. We should be engaging with all the individuals involved. And so just kind of laying some of those knee-jerk reactions and fears to rest, that, we're doing the work.
Thank you both. I'm watching the clock, and so I'm trying to figure out how we can get to at least one more question here. There's so many good questions that came in, and still wrap up on time. There's one question that I think goes a little bit broader, but I think is a really important one to raise. And so I'll open this up to any of you, but Bob Hearn, I may put you on the spot as taking a first attempt at it. So we got the question, what are the efforts to get those with lived experience as part of the think tanks that some of you have referenced, a seat at the table to discuss engagement, strategies, and implementation? They said, I found in over 25 years of experience, it has not been diverse in the think tanks, leading to a gap in efforts to support youth and families in this demographic. So I'm curious about any thoughts about what those efforts are underway that you're aware of to have people with lived experience as part of these think tanks, or I'll expand the question again, sort of putting together these ideas of what is best practice, or how should the work be done?
What I would point to is, I think this is a question that the Associate Commissioner, our new Associate Commissioner at the Children's Bureau, Aisha Schomburg, this is a question and a challenge that she is discussing, and is an important part of the work that she is trying to do. I think that this is a conversation that, from my experience, that is happening in almost every part of child welfare that I'm involved in right now. We've seen, I think, over the past, in my work experience, so I'm going to do it from my experience, we've seen a huge change in valuing those with lived experience and giving them a greater seat at the table at a programmatic level, but I don't think as much as a systemic level where that change really needs to have. And so I think we're starting to see that now, but I'm almost going to pass it over to my colleague whose expertise is in systemic change, and that's Bob Friend.
So Bob, can you give us your 1-minute answer to this very complex question?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I have a 30-minute answer. I don't know
Sure.
about the 1-minute answer. Yeah, I think it's really a subset of the things that I've been saying all along. And I think once I get started, I won't be able to stop. So, but happy to talk about it on an, further on an ongoing basis. I do want to point folks, we've developed 14 podcasts. It's called Let's Have a Conversation. It's free on Apple and Spotify and all your sites. And I tried to interview folks from across the child welfare continuum about their promising practices and different aspects of work. So I invite you to check there, as well as our website, familypermanency.org. And I'm happy to engage in further conversation if folks wish.
Great. Thank you all. I do want to make sure we're wrapping up on time. So let's move ahead to the next slide. And this does have contact information for our presenters here. So for those of you who want to follow up for more information or to dive in to continue the conversation, here's the contact information. And we will be sharing these PowerPoint slides. So you'll have these, they can get them through our website once we have those posted, and we can get them sent out to all of you. Let's go to the next one. We do want to highlight a few resources here. We have several resources on our website specifically related to family finding and engagement, including the recording of our first webinar that we did earlier this summer. It's the last bullet point listed there. All of our resources are free for all of you to use and share with colleagues. We encourage you to dive into the website and find great resources that will help you in all parts of your work. I also just want to highlight, since we're talking about resources, to that question about incorporating people with lived experience. The Children's Bureau, who's our funder, did issue a funding announcement earlier this year, and presumably will be announcing the recipient later this year for a quality improvement center on engaging youth in their own permanency and in systems permanency work. So there is that effort at the federal level in that particular area with that quality improvement center to really put youth voices at the center of both their individual permanency planning, but also looking at it in terms of systems level work. So I think that's exciting to highlight as probably a future resource that'll be coming up. Next slide, please. So just to wrap up, we encourage you to go to our website at professionals.adoptuskids.org, access our resources. Again, everything is free. You can sign up for our newsletter and get notifications. I do ask that you'll fill out your evaluation survey that you'll get shortly after this webinar and give us your feedback on this session. And in case you're looking for another webinar this week, we do have another one coming up this Thursday on photo listing and response systems for those child or youth specific inquiries. So that webinar, you can get the information on our website as well if you have not yet registered for that and would like to join us. So with that, we thank you all for joining us. We hope this was helpful and informative and inspiring. It certainly was for me to get to hear from all of our speakers. Tyler, Bob, and Jennifer, thank you all for being part of this. And everyone, we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.